It's going to split a crowd. It is going to divide an audience. But what do you reckon? Pretty or ugly? Unique. I'm going to very politely say unique. But with a bona fide retro skin, and I like the fact that Suzuki have decided to tap into one of their bikes from the 80s. An older line for them, but not going the exact same route as everyone else. They've definitely carved their own path. And they have carved it with Japanese steel. Cute little katana on the side there, I quite like that. So now that we're done ogling it, let's get out and ride. So one of the things I think you'll notice when you get on this thing is that the throttle response is really progressive. It should go up to about 9,500 for peak torque. I'm going to leave it in second because I kind of want to explore that a little bit further. But there's no kind of dramatic shift in power. Seemingly, no matter how far you get up there, it seems pretty consistent. So if you respond to that kind of engine, then I think you'll quite like this. It's a sporty enough position, but you are perched quite high, so your knees are kind of tucked in nice and tight. The seat is 825 millimeters. It shifts you up a little bit and a little bit forward, but then the bars are obviously raised, so you're a little bit more relaxed. I don't know that it would get that uncomfortable even if you were doing bigger distances on this thing. If you're wanting to do a little bit of touring, it hasn't got any kind of fairing on the front, so you're kind of exposed to the elements. It's a little bit vibey. I can feel it through my bum, but in case you don't believe me, you can hear it through the bars. Let it sing.
So I think when they've designed this thing, they've been quite divisive. They haven't followed the rest of the crowd by any stretch, because this thing doesn't look like anything else out there. And I like that. I like the fact that they're bold enough and brave enough to go their own direction. You will, I'm sure, be aware that it is based on the GSX S1000. The engine is therefore a 999cc liquid-cooled inline four-cylinder. It makes a claimed 150 PS, or I've heard quoted 148 brake horsepower as well. That's at 10,000 revs, and 108 Newton meters found at 9,500, or 79 foot-pounds in old money.
I've been on bikes with similar power. I wouldn't have said this is as immediately obvious that you're on something that, you know, potentially dangerous. It's quite subtle, quite genteel about the way it delivers it. At some point I really need to hold up to about 10,000, or as close as I can get, just to see what it's like. It's quite linear, actually, quite a progressive acceleration on it.
It revs pretty high. Clearly, it's a four-cylinder, so 9,500 you're hitting peak torque, and then up to 10 you get your peak horsepower. I'm not sure if I even touched 10,000 revs, because I didn't necessarily feel like I needed to, for the most part. It pulls away pretty consistently the whole way through. It is very consistent with its power delivery. It is very linear with that power delivery as well. There are no kind of weird spikes or jolts. It doesn't necessarily get that much keener the more you hold on, although I know it must. I think part of the reason I didn't necessarily hold on to the revs as much as I might on other four-cylinders is because, as with the Honda CB1000R that I tried recently, it's a little bit buzzy when you get to that top end. Dare I say, distractingly so. Maybe you'll be expecting it, and maybe everyone else was as well, because I haven't heard anyone else pick it up on that. Or maybe everyone else just likes a glute massage. It's nice, it's a nice feeling.
I want a medium pressure, all in the glutes. It does vibrate a lot though, it really does. In case you're wondering, by the way, I've got it in traction control 1. I'm not going to be playing around with that too much. I definitely don't need traction control 3 because it's not a wet day, and I don't feel the need to knock it off entirely. I haven't even seen that light engage. I'm sure it possibly has at some point, but not that I've noticed, and I certainly haven't felt anything through the bars or through the throttle, so it's definitely not intrusive, put it that way.
It doesn't have any rider modes. It does have 3 different settings for the traction control. One is pretty mild, 2 is your kind of standard setting, and 3 obviously is for wet conditions. I like that because I don't get an awful lot of time to go through rider modes, so really it just made my day a little bit easier. So thanks Suzuki, thanks for thinking of me.
It's quite comfortable actually on it as well. I'll show you the seat just briefly to show you that it is quite narrow. It tapers in a little bit, which works quite well in hiding the fact that it is a relatively tall bike. 825mm for seat height, but the fact that it does taper in, it is quite narrow, means that you can get your feet on the floor flat. It's also quite a tucked position though. If you can see my leg is there, you can see that it does tuck in quite a sporty fashion. Again, it'll be the same as the GSX S with raised bars. There's not a lot of pressure on your neck. You've got good visibility when you're looking around as well, which is quite useful. It means that you don't ruin your back or your neck. I love the cute little graphic from it. Straight out of the 80s. It's not soft suspension, it's not lardy, but I can feel a little bit of a bounce to it while still feeling connected enough to the road. The only thing I'm not necessarily used to is that it's a little bit taller than the bikes that I would generally be sat on, and that leaves me feeling a little disconnected from the road because I quite like a low bike. It takes me a little while to trust that I'm still sticking to the tarmac, especially when the roads are a little bit kind of bumpy or wavy like this. When you try and test out the suspension, it's somewhat beneficial because you can see what it's like real world, not on a track, because not everything you're going to ride on is going to be perfectly paved. Sometimes you're going to be on some kind of sketchy roads like this.
Suspension, in case you're wondering, is Kayaba. Adjustable on the front for preload, compression and rebound. Rear is also Kayaba, adjustable for preload and rebound. Again, I'd heard criticism that maybe not criticism, but feedback that the rear was a little bit soft and the front was a little bit too stiff. Again, I'm not sure if I noticed a huge difference between the two or a huge disparity in terms of quality, but that's probably because I wasn't on roads where I could push it to the same sort of degree. The nice thing about my roads, or the roads that I got to test it on, were that actually they weren't the most even. So it was a fair real-world test for the suspension, but I had enough comfort there. It didn't feel like I was getting bucked out the seat, which usually when you're on a sportier bike or something that is a little bit firmer, as soon as you go over a bump, it just throws you out of that seat. And I didn't get much of that from the Katana. And maybe that does signify a little bit that the rear is softer. All I can say is that it left me feeling nice and connected and gave enough feedback to have a smooth, comfortable, sporty ride.
The other thing you'll notice quite quickly is that the brakes are very good. They have outsourced. Unlike some of their Japanese contemporaries, they have gone to Brembo. They've gone for European standard for quality, really. I know Yamaha and Honda don't mind making their own, but I do appreciate the fact that Suzuki have gone to Brembo to give it a little extra stopping power. Obviously that would, you would assume, bump the price up a little bit, but having said that, £11,399, that's not too bad now, is it, for something like this?
And you can get yourself one of these bikes for £11,399. Do I think it's worth its money? Yes. Yes, I do. You tend to find that the Japanese market, they do pitch their bikes a little bit cheaper than the European counterparts. The comparisons are more likely to be drawn with something like the Kawasaki Z1000, the Yamaha MT-10 I suppose, or the Honda CB1000R. Though I think in actuality its biggest threat comes in-house from the GSX S1000, because you sacrifice nothing by the way of performance, but you save yourself £900. So really, if you're wondering whether or not you want to buy this bike, I've got one question for you. Do you miss Wham? Were you a fan of Duran Duran? Guns N' Roses, Queen? Do you like a perm, is what I'm asking. Because if you don't, if you're not too upset about missing the 80s, then go for the modern styled alternative of the exact same bike.
It's very polite when it starts up. And if you want to hear the exhaust, which isn't actually that loud, I think a lot of the noise comes from the air induction and from the engine itself, but it does sound good. It's quite nice. It's how you want it to sound, how you would expect it to sound, I would say.
And if they're the only ones that decide to dust off their catalogue from the 80s, I will be surprised. We'll see who follows suit next. Thank you very much for watching. If you're new, feel free to subscribe. If you're returning, thank you very much and welcome back. And I'll see you in the next video.